The lost city that proves ancient engineers understood physics better than us. Somewhere beneath dense vegetation, fractured mountains, and centuries of silence, there is a city that should not exist. Not because it is ancient, but because every stone inside it challenges the limits of what modern civilization believes ancient people were capable of building. When archaeologists first uncovered the ruins, they expected primitive tools, crude construction methods, and the familiar story repeated in every history book. What they found instead forced engineers, physicists, and architects into a disturbing realization. Some of these structures displayed a level of precision that modern technology still struggles to replicate today. Massive stone blocks weighing dozens of tons fit together so perfectly that even a razor blade cannot pass between them. Walls built thousands of years ago continue standing after earthquakes that destroyed nearby modern buildings. Underground water systems still function after centuries buried beneath earth and debris. And hidden within the city's design are mathematical alignments so exact that they appear connected to principles of physics humanity supposedly discovered only recently. The deeper researchers looked, the stranger the mystery became. How could a civilization without computers, cranes, steel machinery, satellites, or modern engineering software create structures capable of resisting time itself? Why do certain architectural techniques found in these ruins outperform methods used by modern engineers today? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, what if ancient civilization understood the natural world in ways modern humanity has completely forgotten? Tonight, you are going to walk through the remains of a lost city that is rewriting everything we thought we knew about intelligence, science, and human history. You will see the impossible stones, the hidden physics buried inside ancient architecture, the underground systems that continue operating after centuries, the astronomical code carved into the city's design, and the terrifying possibility that history may not be a story of constant progress at all. Because what if humanity is not becoming more advanced? What if we are rediscovering fragments of knowledge once mastered thousands of years ago by a civilization the world was never supposed to remember? The day modern engineers realized the ancient world made no sense. The first thing the engineers noticed was the silence. Not the silence of the jungle surrounding the ruins, nor the stillness hanging over the abandoned city, but the silence among the experts themselves. Architects who had spent their entire careers designing modern skyscrapers suddenly stood motionless in front of walls older than entire nations, staring at stonework they could not explain. The expedition had arrived expecting another archaeological site: broken temples, primitive carvings, predictable ruins weathered by time. Instead, they found precision so disturbing that even the laser scanners began revealing contradictions almost immediately. The cuts between the stones were nearly perfect, not visually perfect, mathematically perfect. Massive blocks weighing more than modern trucks had been shaped and connected with a level of accuracy that should have required advanced machinery. There were no signs of mortar, no evidence of correction marks, no visible mistakes. Every angle appeared intentional, every surface aligned with impossible consistency. One structural engineer reportedly measured gaps so small that modern construction standards would classify them as exceptional even by today's technology. Then came the next shock. The city had survived earthquakes. Not one earthquake, many. For centuries, violent seismic activity had shaken the region repeatedly, destroying newer settlements nearby. Concrete cracked, roads collapsed, steel structures twisted under pressure. Yet these ancient walls remained standing with almost unnatural stability. That was the moment the investigation changed completely. The ruins were no longer being treated as historical artifacts. They became a scientific problem. Engineers began analyzing the foundations and discovered something deeply unsettling. The stones were not stacked randomly. They had been shaped in ways that distributed force dynamically across the structure itself. Some blocks even appeared designed to move slightly during seismic activity before locking back into place afterward. Modern earthquake-resistant architecture uses similar principles today, but these ruins were thousands of years old. The deeper the experts investigated, the more uncomfortable the conclusions became. Certain construction methods found in the city resembled techniques modern science only fully understood recently. Even stranger, some features appeared optimized not only for stability, but for resonance, temperature control, and energy distribution. And then someone asked the question nobody wanted to answer. What if the ancient builders were not experimenting blindly? What if they actually understood the forces they were manipulating? That single idea transformed the ruins from an archaeological mystery into something far more dangerous. Because if ancient engineers possessed knowledge sophisticated enough to rival or surpass aspects of modern science, then history itself might be incomplete, not partially incomplete, fundamentally incomplete. And hidden somewhere deeper inside the city was evidence that this was only the beginning, the civilization that vanished without leaving answers. The deeper researchers moved into the ruins, the more unsettling the silence became. Not a silence caused by abandonment, a silence caused by absence. Because for a city this advanced, this massive, and this sophisticated, there should have been records everywhere, histories, names of rulers, accounts from neighboring civilizations, trade routes, wars, religious ceremonies, something. Entire empires have survived in fragmented scrolls and broken inscriptions, yet this civilization appeared to have slipped through history like a shadow erased before sunrise. That contradiction disturbed historians more than the engineering itself. How does a civilization capable of constructing architectural wonders vanish almost completely from human memory? At first, archaeologists assumed the answer was simple. Time destroys everything. Civilizations collapse, records burn, stone erodes. But the more evidence they uncovered, the less convincing those explanations became. The city showed signs of immense organization. Its roads were carefully planned. Its water systems were integrated into the terrain with extraordinary precision. Its structures aligned with astronomical events that required generations of observation to calculate accurately. This was not the work of scattered tribes improvising survival in isolation. This was the work of a civilization operating with long-term scientific understanding. Yet almost nobody wrote about them. Even ancient chroniclers who documented wars, kings, eclipses, and natural disasters barely mentioned the existence of such a place. In nearby regions, myths survived about builders from before memory, mysterious people associated with impossible stone structures and sacred mountains. But historians dismissed many of these accounts as symbolic folklore. Now those stories were being reconsidered, because buried beneath the roots of the jungle were ruins proving that someone extraordinary had once existed there. And then came another disturbing discovery. There were signs the city had not simply declined naturally over centuries. Certain sections appeared intentionally dismantled. Some pathways had been buried deliberately. Key chambers showed evidence of destruction not caused by earthquakes or erosion, but by human action. It was as if someone wanted parts of the city hidden. That possibility changed everything. Researchers began investigating whether the civilization had collapsed suddenly instead of gradually. Some theories pointed toward war. Others suggested environmental catastrophe. But a smaller group of experts proposed something far stranger. The knowledge itself may have become dangerous, because the city was not built like other ancient settlements. Its architecture suggested understanding. Its geometry suggested calculation. Its infrastructure suggested planning so advanced that many experts struggled to explain how ancient builders achieved it without tools modern historians believed were necessary. And when civilizations possess knowledge powerful enough to change society, history often becomes violent. Libraries burn, temples are destroyed, records disappear. The winners rewrite the past. That pattern has repeated throughout human history more times than most people realize. Entire cultures have vanished because those who came later either feared them, conquered them, or refused to preserve what they represented. Could that have happened here? Could humanity have inherited only fragments of a much older scientific tradition, while the rest disappeared beneath war, collapse, and time? The ruins seemed to whisper that possibility everywhere researchers looked. Broken carvings hinted at symbols nobody fully understood. Collapsed chambers concealed mechanisms whose purposes remained unclear. And beneath the city itself, hidden far below the visible structures, archaeologists discovered tunnels extending into darkness beyond the mapped areas of the site. That was when the investigation stopped feeling historical. It started feeling forbidden, because whatever this civilization knew, traces of it were still buried underground, waiting for someone to uncover the parts history failed to erase. The stones that defy modern construction methods. The first stone looked ordinary from a distance, rough, ancient, weathered by centuries of rain and wind. But the moment engineers touched it, the illusion disappeared, because this was not primitive construction. This was precision hidden beneath age. As researchers moved deeper into the city, they began finding blocks so massive that transporting them alone should have been nearly impossible. Some weighed more than 50 tons. Others were positioned high above ground level on steep terrain where modern cranes would struggle to operate even today. Yet the true mystery was not their size. It was their perfection. The stones were connected with such extraordinary accuracy that many joints remained nearly seamless despite thousands of years of earthquakes, erosion, and environmental pressure. In some places, the cuts followed irregular geometric patterns so complex that they appeared almost fluid, as though the builders had softened solid rock before shaping it. Modern engineers studying the ruins encountered an uncomfortable problem immediately. The city showed no clear evidence of the construction methods historians expected ancient civilizations to use. There were no deep chisel scars consistent with primitive stone shaping, no obvious signs of repeated correction, no indication that trial and error played a major role in the construction process. Instead, the surfaces appeared intentional from the beginning, controlled, measured, calculated. Some blocks contained dozens of perfectly angled contact points designed to interlock under pressure. Others displayed curved internal cuts, requiring astonishing planning accuracy long before the stones were ever moved into position. And then came the detail that disturbed experts most of all. The stones were not identical. Every block was unique. This meant the builders were not simply repeating one standard shape over and over. Each piece had been individually designed to fit into a larger structural system with almost surgical precision. Even with modern digital modeling software, reproducing this level of customized stone integration would require immense effort. So how had ancient builders accomplished it without computers, lasers, powered cutting tools, or modern measuring systems? That question haunted every investigation. Some researchers proposed lost techniques involving gradual abrasion using sand and water over long periods of time. Others suggested advanced understanding of stone fracturing and thermal manipulation. But none of the explanations fully accounted for the consistency found throughout the city. Because the deeper investigators looked, the more impossible the craftsmanship became. Certain stones appeared polished in ways that reflected light unusually evenly. Some cuts were so exact that vibration tests showed remarkably efficient force transfer across entire walls. In seismic simulations, portions of the ancient structures distributed pressure more effectively than some modern masonry systems. And the builders had achieved all of this thousands of years ago, without electricity, without engines, without industrial machinery. That contradiction began creating tension inside the scientific community itself, because accepting the evidence meant confronting a possibility many experts found deeply uncomfortable. Ancient civilization may not have been technologically primitive in the way modern society imagines, Perhaps their intelligence developed differently. Perhaps they prioritized mastery of materials instead of mass production. Perhaps they understood stone not as dead weight, but as a dynamic structural medium capable of interacting with pressure, vibration, temperature, and movement in sophisticated ways. The ruins forced modern engineers into a humiliating realization. For all humanity's technological advancement, some of the methods used to build these ancient walls still remain beyond complete explanation. And hidden inside the city were structures even stranger than the stones themselves. Because researchers were beginning to discover that the builders had not only mastered construction, they may have mastered physics, the hidden physics buried inside the architecture. At first, the structures looked like monuments. Then they started behaving like machines. That realization emerged slowly during the investigation, almost by accident. Engineers analyzing the city's foundations began noticing patterns too consistent to ignore. The buildings were not simply standing against nature. They appeared designed to cooperate with it. Every angle, every corridor, every stone placement seemed connected to forces the ancient builders understood with disturbing precision. The first clue came from the earthquakes. Modern seismic specialists studying the ruins discovered that many walls were intentionally constructed with slight internal flexibility. Instead of resisting movement rigidly, the structures absorbed and redistributed energy across interconnected stone surfaces. During seismic simulations, some sections performed with astonishing efficiency, reducing stress concentrations in ways strikingly similar to modern anti-seismic engineering. Except these ruins were thousands of years older than modern structural science. Then researchers discovered something even stranger. Certain chambers amplified sound unnaturally. A single voice spoken at one end of a corridor could travel with surprising clarity across long distances. Low-frequency vibrations behaved differently inside specific rooms, creating resonance effects that modern acoustic engineers later mapped with growing fascination. This was not random architecture. The city had been tuned. Some researchers began proposing that the builders intentionally designed portions of the city around resonance frequencies, using geometry to manipulate sound waves, pressure distribution, and structural stability simultaneously. And the deeper they investigated, the more impossible the city became. Specific corridors aligned with seasonal wind currents in ways that naturally regulated internal temperatures. Underground spaces maintained remarkable thermal consistency despite violent climate variations outside. Water channels were positioned not only for transportation and drainage, but also to reduce hydrostatic pressure beneath major structures. The entire city appeared interconnected through invisible physical relationships. Modern engineers normally separate architecture into categories: structural engineering, fluid dynamics, thermal management, acoustics, seismic stability, but this civilization seemed to treat them as one unified system. That idea changed how researchers viewed the ruins completely. The city was no longer interpreted as a collection of buildings. It became a network, a carefully engineered environment designed to interact with natural forces instead of fighting against them. And then came one of the most disturbing discoveries of all. Some structures displayed geometric ratios repeatedly associated with resonance behavior found in nature itself. Similar proportional relationships appear in wave mechanics, harmonic systems, and energy distribution patterns studied by modern physics today. Coincidence suddenly became difficult to defend, especially when investigators realized how many of these patterns repeated across the city with intentional consistency. It forced scientists into dangerous intellectual territory. Because if these ancient builders truly understood principles involving resonance, force transfer, environmental harmonics, and dynamic stability, then modern civilization may have misunderstood the scientific sophistication of the ancient world entirely. Not because ancient people had computers or futuristic machines, but because they may have developed a radically different approach to knowledge itself. Modern civilization often dominates nature through power. These builders appeared to work with nature through understanding. That distinction may explain why their structures survived centuries of collapse, while countless newer civilizations disappeared around them. And buried beneath the city, hidden below the visible ruins, researchers were beginning to uncover another system so advanced that some experts initially refused to believe it was ancient at all. An underground network capable of manipulating water with astonishing precision. Why the city survived disasters that destroy modern buildings. The earthquake struck just before dawn. Modern houses collapsed across nearby villages. Concrete walls split apart. Roads cracked open beneath the force of the tremors. Emergency teams rushed through clouds of dust searching for survivors, while terrified families fled into the streets. But high above the destruction, inside the ancient ruins, something almost impossible happened. The city barely moved. When engineers inspected the site afterward, they expected major structural damage. The earthquake had been powerful enough to destroy modern buildings designed with contemporary safety regulations. Yet many of the ancient walls remained standing exactly as they had for centuries. That was the moment the ruins stopped being viewed as historical curiosities. They became an engineering embarrassment, because the uncomfortable truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Some structures built thousands of years ago were outperforming modern architecture during natural disasters. Researchers immediately began comparing the ancient construction techniques with modern seismic engineering principles. The results shocked them. The builders of the lost city had understood something fundamental about movement, pressure, and stability that modern civilization only rediscovered recently. Most modern buildings are designed around rigid resistance. During earthquakes, that rigidity often becomes a weakness. Energy travels violently through fixed structures until stress fractures begin forming inside the materials themselves. But the ancient city operated differently. Its walls were designed to move, not collapse. Move. Massive interlocking stones distributed seismic force across multiple contact points instead of concentrating pressure in a single location. Slight internal flexibility allowed structures to absorb shock waves naturally before settling back into place. Some blocks were shaped with angled joints that reduced direct fracture pressure during violent ground movement. It was an astonishingly sophisticated concept, especially for a civilization historians once described as primitive. The deeper the analysis went, the more humiliating the comparison became for modern engineering. Certain retaining walls demonstrated extraordinary drainage efficiency, preventing water pressure from destabilizing foundations during storms and floods. Elevated sections redirected weight loads with geometric precision. Even the placement of buildings across the terrain appeared optimized to minimize geological vulnerability. Nothing seemed accidental. Every structural choice appeared connected to survival. And perhaps that was exactly the point. Because ancient civilizations lived close to nature in ways modern societies no longer do. They experienced earthquakes, floods, landslides, droughts, and storms without industrial technology protecting them from environmental forces. Survival depended not on overpowering nature, but on understanding its behavior deeply enough to coexist with it. That philosophy may explain why the city endured while newer civilizations vanished around it. Modern society often builds for speed, efficiency, and expansion. These ancient builders constructed for permanence, for adaptation, for centuries. And then researchers uncovered another disturbing detail. Some sections of the city appeared intentionally over-engineered, far beyond what was necessary for ordinary survival. Walls thicker than expected, foundations extending deeper than required, structural redundancies hidden inside the architecture itself. It was as though the builders were preparing for disasters they knew would come, not someday, repeatedly. That possibility introduced a terrifying question. What had these people experienced that forced them to understand catastrophe so well? because cities do not evolve this level of resilience by accident. Knowledge like this is usually written in trauma, in collapse, in survival, and hidden beneath the ruins deep underground. Researchers were about to uncover a system even more advanced than the city's earthquake-resistant architecture. A hydraulic network so sophisticated that parts of it still functioned after centuries buried beneath stone and earth. The water system that should have been impossible. The entrance to the tunnel was hidden beneath collapsed stone and tangled vegetation. At first, archaeologists believed it was nothing more than another burial chamber or drainage passage buried by time. But when researchers cleared the debris and descended into the darkness below the city, they realized they had uncovered something far more disturbing. The ruins were alive. Water was still flowing, not stagnant pools trapped underground for centuries. Flowing water, controlled water, moving through carefully engineered channels carved directly into stone with astonishing precision. And somehow, after hundreds of years buried beneath the earth, parts of the system still worked. That discovery transformed the entire investigation. Because building monuments is one thing, building a hydraulic network capable of surviving centuries of environmental collapse is something else entirely. The deeper engineers explored the underground system, the more impossible it became. Narrow channels redirected pressure with remarkable efficiency. Certain pathways accelerated water naturally without mechanical pumps. Other sections slowed flow rates deliberately to reduce erosion and structural damage. Every curve appeared calculated. Every angle served a purpose. Modern hydraulic engineers studying the ruins quickly realized the builders understood fluid behavior at an extraordinary level. The channels maintained stable distribution gradients across varying terrain elevations. Pressure release points were positioned strategically throughout the system. Drainage routes protected foundations from saturation during storms. And all of it had been achieved without modern excavation equipment, reinforced concrete, computer modeling, or industrial materials. Some sections of the underground network became even stranger. Researchers discovered polished stone surfaces designed to minimize friction resistance. Reservoir chambers maintained surprisingly stable temperatures. Hidden filtration systems separated sediment naturally using gravity and flow manipulation alone. It was not primitive plumbing. It was environmental engineering. And the city itself appeared designed around water as if the builders understood it not merely as a resource, but as a force requiring balance, movement, and control. That philosophy separated the ancient system from much of modern infrastructure. Modern cities often force water into submission through brute engineering, massive pumps, artificial barriers, industrial pressure systems. But the lost city worked with natural flow patterns instead of resisting them. The builders studied terrain carefully. They understood gradients. They anticipated flooding behavior. They integrated the landscape itself into the hydraulic design. That approach made the entire city astonishingly resilient. Even more disturbing, some researchers began suspecting the underground channels served purposes beyond transportation and drainage alone. Acoustic specialists noticed strange resonance effects near certain water pathways. Vibrations moved unusually through portions of the stone network. In some chambers, flowing water amplified low-frequency sounds across large distances underground. The system was behaving almost like an instrument. That discovery opened a possibility many experts initially avoided discussing publicly. What if the hydraulic network was connected to the city's larger understanding of resonance, energy transfer, and environmental harmonics? Not mystical energy, physical energy, wave behavior, frequency, pressure, motion. The city was beginning to look less like an ancient settlement and more like a carefully calibrated machine built around natural forces modern civilization barely notices anymore. And then investigators uncovered something even stranger. Certain underground chambers aligned perfectly with celestial events occurring above ground. That was when researchers realized the city's builders may not have separated engineering from astronomy at all. To them, The movements of water, stone, vibration, and the stars themselves may have belonged to the same system of knowledge. The astronomical code embedded in the city, the alignment was too perfect to ignore. At sunrise during the solstice, light entered the ruins through a narrow stone passage hidden deep within the city. For only a few minutes each year, the sunlight traveled across multiple chambers before illuminating a single carved surface at the center of the structure. Researchers initially assumed it was symbolic. Then they started taking measurements. The angle matched celestial calculations with astonishing precision. Not approximate precision, scientific precision. The builders had positioned the structure according to astronomical movements so exact that modern software later confirmed the alignment would have functioned accurately thousands of years ago when the city was still alive. That discovery changed everything again, because tracking celestial cycles at this level required generations of observation, advanced mathematical understanding, and extraordinary long-term planning. This was not accidental architecture built around superstition. It was calculated engineering connected directly to the sky. And the deeper researchers investigated, the more the city began revealing an invisible astronomical map hidden inside its design. Certain roads aligned with solar events. Specific towers cast shadows functioning like seasonal markers. Underground chambers synchronized with lunar cycles. Open plazas reflected star positions visible only during key periods of the year. The entire city appeared connected to a cosmic rhythm carefully embedded into stone. Modern archaeologists often separate science from spirituality when studying ancient civilizations. But this city refused to fit inside those categories. Its builders seemed to view astronomy not as mythology, but as an essential structural force governing life, architecture, agriculture, navigation, and time itself. To them, the sky was not decoration. It was data. That realization forced scientists into another uncomfortable conclusion. The builders possessed observational accuracy far beyond what historians once believed possible for ancient civilizations without telescopes or modern instruments. Some alignments were so advanced that researchers proposed the civilization maintained systematic astronomical records over centuries, possibly even longer. Certain structural orientations corresponded not only to yearly solar patterns, but also to slower celestial cycles requiring enormous spans of observation to detect accurately. And then came the most disturbing possibility of all. The city's astronomical design may not have been created solely for measuring time. It may have been connected to the physics embedded throughout the architecture itself. Because some researchers noticed repeating relationships between celestial positioning and the city's resonance-based structures. Certain chambers displaying unusual acoustic behavior also aligned with key solar events. Water pathways reflected lunar positioning. Stone corridors amplified sound differently depending on seasonal atmospheric conditions. The entire city seemed interconnected through systems modern science normally studies separately. Astronomy, acoustics, hydraulics, structural engineering, environmental physics. But the builders appeared to treat them as one unified language. That idea fundamentally challenged the modern assumption that ancient civilizations developed knowledge in isolated categories. Perhaps these people understood the world holistically in ways humanity later fragmented into separate sciences. And if that was true, then the city may not have been built merely to survive nature. It may have been designed to synchronize with it. The implications became even stranger when visitors began reporting unusual experiences inside certain aligned structures. Disorientation, changes in sound perception, sudden emotional intensity, strange echoes behaving unpredictably in specific chambers during particular times of day. At first, scientists dismissed these accounts as psychological suggestion. Then acoustic specialists entered the ruins with modern equipment, and some of the readings they recorded made no sense at all. The strange energy effects. Witnesses still report today. The first reports sounded ridiculous. Tourists described hearing whispers inside empty chambers. Explorers spoke about sudden pressure changes deep within the ruins. Some visitors claimed specific areas caused intense emotional reactions for no obvious reason. Others reported dizziness, disorientation, or an overwhelming sensation of presence while standing near certain stone structures. Most scientists dismissed the stories immediately. Ancient ruins often trigger psychological responses. Isolation, atmosphere, expectation, and fear can distort human perception easily. But then researchers began documenting physical anomalies they could actually measure. That changed the conversation completely. Acoustic engineers testing the underground chambers discovered unusual sound behavior throughout portions of the city. Certain frequencies traveled far beyond expected distances. Low vibrations amplified naturally inside specific corridors. Some chambers produced resonance effects so powerful that a simple footstep could echo with unnatural intensity through hidden stone pathways. The architecture was interacting with sound deliberately. Even stranger, some spaces appeared designed to manipulate human perception through acoustic pressure itself. Modern science already knows low-frequency vibrations can influence emotional states, balance, anxiety, and physical sensation under specific conditions. And the ruins seemed filled with those frequencies. Researchers conducting experiments inside the city noticed that certain areas generated standing wave patterns unlike anything expected from random ancient construction. Small changes in position dramatically altered sound perception. Voices seemed to move unpredictably through stone chambers. In some locations, whispers could be heard clearly across impossible distances, while louder sounds vanished into silence. The city behaved almost like an enormous acoustic instrument. Then investigators began studying temperature behavior. Certain underground sections remained unusually stable despite violent environmental fluctuations outside. Some stone chambers cooled naturally with remarkable efficiency. Others concentrated heat in highly localized areas depending on sunlight positioning and airflow. Again, nothing appeared accidental. The builders seemed to understand how geometry could manipulate environmental conditions with extraordinary precision. And then came the phenomenon researchers struggled most to explain: the sensation people experienced inside specific structures. Even trained investigators began describing similar reactions independently: intense awareness, sudden unease, emotional amplification. A strange feeling that the architecture itself was affecting perception somehow. Skeptics argued the reactions were psychological. Others were less certain. Because modern neuroscience has already established that environmental frequencies, resonance patterns, lighting conditions, confined geometry, and spatial acoustics can influence the human nervous system profoundly. What if the builders understood that? Not mystically, scientifically. That possibility transformed the ruins into something far stranger than an ancient city. The structures may have been engineered to shape human experience itself through controlled interaction with sound, vibration, light, temperature, and movement. In other words, the city was not only built to survive nature, it may have been built to influence the human mind through nature. That idea disturbed many researchers deeply because it implied a level of environmental understanding far beyond what historians normally attribute to ancient civilizations. And the evidence kept growing. Certain geometric patterns repeated constantly throughout the ruins: ratios, angles, alignments, structural relationships appearing again and again across temples, corridors, underground systems, and ceremonial spaces. At first they looked decorative. Then mathematicians began analyzing them carefully. What they discovered suggested the civilization may have encoded knowledge directly into the architecture itself. Not through language, through structure. The forbidden knowledge ancient builders never wrote down. The greatest mystery inside the city was not what researchers found. It was what they did not find. No massive libraries, no surviving scientific manuscripts, no detailed engineering instructions carved into stone. For a civilization capable of constructing structures this advanced, the absence of written technical knowledge made no sense. At first, historians assumed the records had simply been destroyed by time, war, or environmental collapse. But as excavations expanded deeper into the ruins, another possibility emerged. What if the builders never intended to preserve their knowledge through writing at all? That idea sounded absurd initially. Modern civilization depends on written information for everything. Science advances through documentation, formulas, archives, textbooks, and recorded observation. Without written systems, knowledge disappears quickly across generations. But the lost city seemed built according to an entirely different philosophy. Its knowledge was embedded directly into the architecture itself. Researchers began noticing repeating geometric relationships hidden across the city. Angles mirrored astronomical cycles. Structural proportions aligned with resonance behavior. Water systems reflected mathematical consistency tied to terrain gradients and pressure distribution. The builders were communicating through patterns, not words. And suddenly the ruins began looking less like abandoned structures and more like a giant physical archive designed to be experienced instead of read. That realization changed how investigators interpreted nearly everything inside the city. Perhaps the civilization believed true understanding could not simply be written down. It had to be observed, measured, felt, experienced directly through interaction with the environment itself. Some researchers proposed that ancient apprentices may have learned engineering not from books, but from studying the behavior of stone, water, sound, shadow, vibration, and celestial movement inside the city itself. In that world, architecture became education, the city became the textbook, and knowledge became inseparable from nature. That approach may explain why the civilization achieved such extraordinary integration between physics, astronomy, acoustics, and environmental engineering. Modern science often isolates disciplines into separate categories studied independently. These builders appeared to treat reality as one interconnected system. And then investigators uncovered something even stranger. Many important structures contained no obvious symbolic decoration at all. No kings celebrating conquest, no monuments glorifying rulers, no giant inscriptions praising political power. Instead, the emphasis remained overwhelmingly focused on geometry, alignment, proportion, and interaction with natural forces. It was as though the civilization valued understanding more than dominance. That distinction may explain why their knowledge feels so alien today. Modern civilizations preserve power through information control, institutions, and written authority. But these builders may have preserved knowledge through direct observation of the physical world itself. And if that system collapses, much of the knowledge disappears instantly. Because without the original teachers, the structures become mysterious ruins instead of functioning educational systems. That possibility turned the city into something tragic. Humanity may have inherited the shell of an ancient scientific worldview while losing the principles necessary to fully understand it. The stones remained. The meaning vanished. And hidden beneath that disappearance was a terrifying implication many researchers slowly began confronting. If one advanced civilization could vanish so completely from human memory, how many others may have disappeared before it? Because scattered across the world are ruins, myths, and unexplained structures suggesting the same disturbing pattern over and over again. Civilizations rise, knowledge expands, something catastrophic happens, and history begins again. The terrifying theory that history was reset more than once. The pattern was impossible to ignore anymore. At first, the lost city appeared unique, an isolated mystery buried beneath centuries of silence. But as researchers compared its engineering principles with ancient sites across different continents, unsettling similarities began emerging everywhere. Massive stone structures aligned with celestial events. Earthquake-resistant construction older than recorded science. Legends describing forgotten builders arriving from a vanished age. mathematical precision appearing in civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years of history. The deeper investigators looked, the more one terrifying possibility started taking shape. What if human civilization has collapsed before? Not once, many times. That idea has haunted historians for generations, but the ruins gave it disturbing new weight. Because modern society assumes progress moves forward continuously, primitive beginnings slowly evolving into advanced civilization through uninterrupted development. But history does not always behave that way. Entire empires have vanished almost overnight. Libraries containing centuries of knowledge have burned to ash in a single invasion. Scientific understanding has disappeared repeatedly throughout human history whenever civilizations collapsed faster than their knowledge could survive. The lost city suddenly looked less like an exception and more like evidence of a repeating cycle humanity barely remembers. Researchers began studying ancient catastrophe records from cultures worldwide, flood myths, stories of fire from the sky, civilizations swallowed by the earth, great collapses marking the end of entire ages. Most had long been dismissed as mythology. Now some experts were reconsidering them carefully, because the archaeological evidence revealed a disturbing truth. Ancient civilizations were often far more interconnected than historians once believed. Trade routes crossed enormous distances. Astronomical knowledge spread between cultures separated by continents. Engineering concepts appeared in regions with no officially recognized contact. It raised a dangerous question. What if history contains missing chapters large enough to erase entire eras of human development? The idea became even more unsettling when researchers analyzed how vulnerable modern civilization actually is. Humanity depends heavily on fragile systems: electricity, digital storage, satellites, industrial supply chains, massive technological networks requiring constant stability to survive. But the lost city endured because its knowledge was embedded physically into stone, geometry, terrain, and natural systems. Even after collapse, fragments survived. Would modern civilization leave behind anything equally resilient after thousands of years? That question disturbed many scientists more than the ruins themselves, because the city represented a completely different model of intelligence, one based not on technological acceleration, but on deep environmental understanding capable of surviving catastrophe. And perhaps that knowledge only becomes valuable during collapse itself. The further researchers pushed this theory, the more uncomfortable the implications became. Ice core evidence revealed sudden climate disasters throughout human history. Geological records confirmed massive volcanic events, floods, droughts, and abrupt environmental shifts capable of destabilizing civilizations globally. Ancient people may have lived much closer to extinction than modern society realizes. That constant proximity to catastrophe could explain why the lost city was built with such obsession toward resilience, harmony, and long-term survival. Its builders may not have been preparing for ordinary life. They may have been preparing for the next collapse. And then came the most unsettling realization of all. Modern civilization may not be as different from those forgotten societies as we believe. Because every civilization in history assumed it would last forever, until suddenly it did not. And standing among ruins older than empires, researchers began asking themselves a question that felt less historical with every passing year. What if humanity is not the first advanced civilization to believe it had reached the peak of progress? What ancient engineers understood about nature that we ignored? The deeper scientists studied the ruins, the harder it became to defend one comforting belief modern civilization has repeated for centuries: that newer automatically means smarter. Because standing inside the lost city forced researchers into a deeply uncomfortable realization. These ancient builders may not have lacked intelligence compared to modern humanity. They may have focused on an entirely different kind of intelligence altogether. Modern civilization measures advancement through speed, automation, expansion, and technological power. We build taller structures, faster machines, larger cities, and systems capable of dominating the environment around us. But the builders of the lost city seem to pursue something radically different: alignment, balance, integration. Their architecture did not overpower nature. It cooperated with it. That difference appeared everywhere throughout the ruins. The city flowed naturally with the terrain instead of flattening it. Water systems worked alongside gravity and pressure, rather than forcing artificial control. Structures absorbed seismic energy through movement instead of resisting earthquakes with rigid force. Astronomical alignments synchronized construction with celestial cycles already governing the environment itself. Nothing inside the city appeared disconnected from the natural world. Modern engineering often isolates systems into separate functions: heating, cooling, drainage, stability, acoustics, energy management. The ancient builders combined them. A single structure could regulate temperature, amplify sound, redirect force, stabilize foundations, and align with astronomical events simultaneously. The city behaved like a living ecosystem made of stone. That philosophy may explain why modern researchers struggle to fully understand it. Contemporary science became extraordinarily powerful by specializing knowledge into isolated disciplines. But specialization also fragmented humanity's perception of how natural systems interact with one another. These builders may have never separated those relationships in the first place. To them, vibration, pressure, geometry, movement, sound, water, light, and astronomy were not independent sciences. They were expressions of the same reality. And perhaps that worldview allowed them to recognize patterns modern civilization often overlooks. That possibility carried enormous implications, because the ruins suggested something profoundly unsettling about human progress itself. Technological advancement does not always equal deeper understanding. Modern civilization can launch satellites into space while still constructing cities vulnerable to floods, earthquakes, environmental collapse, and psychological instability. We dominate nature technologically, yet remain deeply dependent on systems so fragile that a single global disruption could destabilize millions of lives within days. The lost city represented the opposite approach. Its builders engineered permanence instead of acceleration, resilience instead of expansion, harmony instead of domination. And thousands of years later, parts of their work still functioned. That contrast forced many researchers into an unexpected emotional reaction: humility. Because for all humanity's modern sophistication, these ruins exposed how much knowledge civilization may have abandoned in pursuit of technological power. Ancient engineers observed nature constantly because survival depended on it. They studied stone behavior, seasonal shifts, water movement, celestial cycles, environmental acoustics, and geological instability not as abstract theories, but as forces shaping existence itself. Modern civilization often treats those same forces as obstacles to overcome. The lost city suggested a radically different possibility. Perhaps the greatest scientific breakthroughs do not come from separating humanity from nature. Perhaps they come from understanding humanity's place within it. And standing among walls older than recorded empires, many researchers began confronting one final terrifying thought. What if these ancient builders were not the primitive beginning of civilization, but the surviving fragments of something humanity once understood far better than we do now? The lost city that changed the meaning of human civilization. The ruins still stand. After earthquakes, floods, invasions, collapse, erosion, and centuries of abandonment, the city continues to resist time with a silence more powerful than any explanation historians have attempted to give it. That silence is what unsettles researchers most now, because after years of excavation, measurement, analysis, and debate, the greatest mystery was never fully solved. The engineers still cannot explain every precision cut. The physicists still debate the resonance hidden inside the architecture. The archaeologists still struggle to understand how a civilization capable of such sophistication disappeared so completely from human memory. And perhaps that uncertainty is exactly what makes the city so dangerous to modern assumptions. For centuries, humanity has comforted itself with a simple narrative. Ancient people were primitive. Civilization evolved gradually. Science advanced in a straight line from ignorance toward understanding. But the lost city shattered that illusion stone by stone, because buried beneath the jungle was evidence of a civilization that understood structural stability, environmental integration, astronomical synchronization, hydraulic engineering, and natural harmonics at levels modern experts still struggle to fully replicate today. Not with computers, not with industrial machinery, not with modern technology, but through observation, patience, geometry, and an intimate understanding of nature modern civilization may have abandoned long ago. That realization changes more than history. It changes how humanity sees itself. Because if one advanced civilization vanished almost completely from the historical record, then certainty becomes dangerous. The foundations of modern historical understanding suddenly feel fragile. Entire chapters of human development may still lie buried beneath deserts, oceans, forests, and mountains, waiting to challenge everything we think we know about the past. And perhaps the most disturbing possibility is not that ancient civilization was more advanced than we imagined. It is that modern civilization may not understand advancement correctly at all. The builders of the lost city left behind no towering industrial empires, no satellites, no digital networks, no machines dominating the planet. Yet their structures survived centuries longer than many modern systems likely will. That contradiction forces an uncomfortable question into the center of human history. What if intelligence is not measured by how much power civilization can generate, but by how deeply it understands the world around it? Standing inside the ruins today, surrounded by stones placed with impossible precision thousands of years ago, it becomes difficult not to feel the weight of that question. Because the city does not feel dead, it feels unfinished, like a message waiting for humanity to become wise enough to understand it again. And maybe that is why the ruins continue to fascinate scientists, engineers, and explorers across the world. Not because they prove ancient people had magical powers or lost futuristic technology, but because they reveal something far more profound. Human civilization may have forgotten forms of knowledge once considered essential for survival. Knowledge about balance, about resilience, about harmony between human beings and the forces governing the natural world. The lost city survived because its builders understood those forces deeply. Modern civilization survives largely because it controls them temporarily. There is a difference between those two things, and history suggests that difference matters more than humanity wants to believe, because every civilization in history once believed it had reached the height of progress. Until one day, all that remained were ruins, and questions future generations could barely answer.